welcome back to Animation Dissection, the podcast where we have little Muppets inside our heads controlling all our thoughts and feelings. I am Neeksy, here of course with Zorak.
That's right, and this week we're going to be talking all about Disney Pixar's Inside Out. See, Inside Out is about a white blood cell named Osmosis Jones, Chris Rock, who patrols Bill Murray's body and finds himself in a heap of trouble when Bill contracts HIV from a chimpanzee. So Osmosis Jones teams up with like a pill, Frasier's brother, who's also a pill, in order to save Bill Murray from the threat of AIDS, voiced by Lawrence Fishburne. There's several scenes of Bill Murray forcibly expelling bodily fluids on his daughter's teacher.
Zorak, I think you're confused. What we're talking about today features two plumber brothers who get lost inside the gigantic body of their turtle-like foe, Bowser.
Oh, we're talking about Disney Pixar's, also known in Japan as Inside Head.
Yes. Yes, inside Bowser's head. Oh, we're going to get emails about that. Anyway, we're going to be talking about Pixar's Inside Out. And of course, before we do that, we got animation news. Dateline 1942, animation news! So
Hitler has stormed.
Speaking of Hitler, The Simpsons is not going to be ending after all. As we were hoping. Okay, we knew it wasn't going to end, but we were hoping that the absence of Harry Shearer was going to be kind of like, the straw that broke the camel's back, or maybe the final cut that would allow the bleeding to exsanguinate the beast. But unfortunately, Harry Shearer has decided that he, in fact, loves money and fame and is returning to do voices for them after all.
I mean,
damn it. We were so close. We could have had this gone.
I mean, after him being in The Simpsons for like the last 10 years, I guess it was a little too much to expect him to all of a sudden be like, actually, I have too much artistic credibility to be sticking around here. Goodbye,
We could wish. So other than that, I don't have too much other news on my side, other than I am really excited for Cartoon Network's new show that's going to be premiering as of recording next week. So it's going to be July 27th, 2015, We Bare Bears. It's a show that's actually created by someone who used to do story work for Pixar.
Yeah, I saw the previews for that on YouTube. I don't know if those were official previews or whatnot, but it looked really funny. I mean, we'll see how it works.
I'm excited. One of my favorite clips I've seen from like the pilot apparently has Panda playing the controller. What is it? The Rock Band controller acoustically, but then he's also singing like mournfully into it, like in his room in the dark. Just love that joke. For some reason, that just tickles me.
It looks
I like
funny,
the art
and
style.
It looks like it has like a fair bit of dark humor. Not really dark, but kid dark. So
It's a nice reprieve from I think a lot of the shows that have. I mean, we love Steven Universe. We love all these other shows that have, a big range of emotions. But I'm also a big fan of stuff that is just genuinely funny. So, like, I'm a huge fan of Amazing World of Gumball. So it would be nice to have this also kind of fit into like that universe of shows that isn't trying to be, more than just a comedy. So
we'll see how it works
excited.
as an episode, though, because that's the big question: is how much. I mean, little chunks were pretty funny. Sometimes that falls apart once you actually try to construct a full episode out of that type of content.
Yeah. If you want to see some stuff for it, actually before it was even animated, it was originally a really kind of short webcomic that the guy had done on his free time called We Three Bears, I think, or the Three Bear Bears. And yeah, so the show's going to be different, but I think there is kind of an interesting comedic sensibility that they're going to keep within there. And there was a nice preview with the voice actors where they kind of talked about the motivations behind the characters themselves and the kind of the thrust of the show. And I think it has a, it's still going to be a comedy, but I think it has at least kind of a understandable emotional thrust of these characters trying to make friends and kind of navigate life in a sympathetic way. So I think it's going to be kind of nice to see that. And I like the art style. I like the color choices, the overall palette, the character designs are just adorable. So I'm looking forward to that. So, and it's also Cartoon Network. I mean, they've been on a goddamn streak with their shows lately. I guess the other news is that pretty much all of their shows have been renewed for more seasons.
Woo.
Like just like the entire block. Like they've all been doing really really well.
Does that include Uncle Grandpa?
It actually does, and Uncle Grandpa is one of those
Uh,
things where it's like I think I'm just not the demographic for that show. The
I
crossover episode of Steven Universe was actually pretty funny. Like it had a lot of really great meta humor, and I think there is occasional brilliance in it, but for me, I find the tone of it a little bit too childishly silly that I really can't get the satirical edge to feel right for me. But that might just be like my own tastes. It's apparently doing well enough. All the Cartoon Network shows are doing really well. I mean, I think Teen Titans Go is currently one of their top rated ones in terms of just like the amount of like just the amount of repeats they do of that show. I mean, it's pretty much all over the network there right now.
Does this include Annoying Orange?
That's been gone for a while.
Thank God.
Yeah, no, that ended a while ago. There was a time period where they were just trying out like a whole bunch of random bullshit. They had that weird live action video game thing. They tried a whole bunch of live action shows and they just were not they were not good. It was the wrong network to do it. I mean, whoever was in charge at the time, I think, just wanted to turn it into Nickelodeon and
Well, Nickelodeon was doing a poor job of being Nickelodeon, so
oh, and they still are. I mean, the only new show I can think of that they have that anybody I know kind of likes is the Harvey Beaks one, which is done by the guy that created Chowder, which was a former Cartoon Network show. So, like, the best thing that Nickelodeon has going for it is someone who was previously from Cartoon Network.
hmm
So, I don't know. I think the other show they have coming out that's animated that's new kind of is Pig Goat Banana Cricket, I think. And I absolutely hated the pilot of that. I mean, the
yeah.
pilot is quite old, but it was some of the most shrill, oddly dated humor. It's just, I mean, there was a great art style to it, like the color choices and the inking and the stylization was kind of cool and everything, but the writing of it was just abysmal.
It was
Just
kind of peak monkey cheese type humor.
it is. It's not just that, but it's just shrill. Like
hmm
I mean, I hate using that word sometimes, but it is the best way I could describe the way it feels. Even when they're not shouting, the humor itself is so sweaty, and it comes across like it's trying to yell, even when it's quiet.
hmm
So, other than that, I don't really have any other news. Other than I think I saw a preview for the Shaun the Sheep movie, which is definitely coming out here, and that was before the movie.
We've had a Shaun the Sheep movie before, right?
No,
Am I thinking about?
Shaun
I'm
the
thinking
Sheep
of
was a TV series in the
that's right.
UK.
I'm confusing it with the other Aardman one with the cows or the chickens.
That was Chicken Run, yes.
Okay. Look,
And the
man,
cows, they
they
would
really
be
like their British
Nickelodeon's
farm
barnyard where the
animals.
male ones had udders. That was not
Yeah.
an Aardman thing.
All right. Anyways, so another thing, I actually have a few things. Hayao Miyazaki, who previously said he was done making films, is back making a new film. It's a 3D CG film. It's going to be 10 minutes long, starring a hairy caterpillar, and we'll see it in probably 4 years. And by we, I mean none of us, unless you go to the Studio Ghibli Museum in Japan, and you might be able to see it there. That's it.
Yeah, a lot of people for some reason were looking at this thing as like, it's his betrayal. He is throwing away 2D. He's like, no, he's just making a short film for the museum, and the museum has tons of things that are different sometimes, and it's okay because he still storyboards and it's still animation, and
It's him just experimenting with a new thing, which is frankly, I think a good thing. Maybe it's not. I'm definitely up there with people that kind of just dislike 3D animation in a general sense. I very much prefer 2D animation. That's because kind of my own personal taste. And I can kind of sympathize, kind of like an oh god, it's cheaper, even though it isn't necessarily. But it's him doing something experimental as a short film that's just going to their museum. And guess what? There's been dozens of these films that only show up at the museum. Like they have I think they have like a Totoro sequel that's only there as a short at their museum. They have lots of stuff like this that only happen. And I think it's interesting that you can only see this stuff actually at their museum because that's their big incentive to get people to attend.
Yep, I've been
But
there actually. The short that they had there that was Ghibli produced was kind of a history of flight kind of thing.
mhm.
Then it was also followed by a very strange Russian short film that no one really understood, and you looked around and watched a whole bunch of people being very confused about what the hell they just saw. But yeah, I mean, the museum is really beautiful. It's probably, I think, one of the big lasting legacies of what they have there. The displays, it has a whole bunch of really great little things that show what the process was like. I mean, they have the way you used to scroll the backgrounds over underneath the cells, and it's a really great museum, and it has a lot of love for the medium of animation, both traditional and new. So I think a lot of people are prematurely getting very worked up over this. And here's the thing: is like, yes, I prefer 2D animation, but I that doesn't mean that I don't think CG isn't somehow a valid medium.
Sure.
Like I think that's the thing is we have kind of a knee jerk kind of reactionary response to CG. I mean, yes, it is great to kind of admit CG's flaws. I mean, and of which there have been and still remain quite a few. Such, for example, that many CG films have a very short shelf life and they age much more horribly than most 2D films. 2D films are still much more watchable, and you don't decry the quality or the limitations of stuff that was produced almost like 70 years ago versus stuff like you've seen 10 years ago. You go, oh, this looks terrible. That's a unique problem to CG. But again, that criticism doesn't necessarily mean that CG doesn't have, benefits and its own artistry and things like that.
Sure. I
So
think part of the people's concerns is the fact that Studio Ghibli has always kind of stood out as a sort of the last bastion of we're doing traditional animation and we're putting a lot of money in it. So I think the kind
yes,
of the knee jerk
exactly.
reaction is, oh no, now they're doing 3D too. It's dead. Which,
Yeah, so
eh,
it's more of a fear of validating a force that is also trying to destroy the 2D industry in a sense. Like
I mean, to some
again,
degree, it's happened.
it has happened to a certain degree, yes. And I mean, we could probably do an episode about like why the decision making process behind going let's do everything CG now, 2D has no value, is kind of built off of a faulty premise. And
Sure.
CG and 2D have their uses, and there's a reason why you use one or the other, etc., etc. But yes, I definitely see that there is kind of like a counter movement. It's because you have like this executive class of people who think, well, CG makes things easier. Computers are these magic boxes that make films appear out of nothing, and it's somehow cheaper, and et cetera, et
Can you
cetera.
say that again while sounding like a corporate businessman chomping on a cigar?
I mean, but that thought process often gets validation when previous 2D artists then move into doing CG. But at the same time, I don't look at this as one of those cases where I don't think the public is the one that gets swayed by these types of things. It is unfortunately the people who are in charge of these studios that get swayed by, this type of behavior. Excuse me. So, other than that, you have a couple other ones, right?
Yeah. So another thing is that in probably sort of niche interest, depending on what your people in the audience's personal interest is in terms of animation, is there was a new Gundam anime announced called Mobile Suit Gundam Iron Blooded Orphans. I'm a Gundam fan, I'll admit. I haven't really been following too closely with a lot of the recent series. They haven't been particularly to my tastes. I mean, some of them have been kind of interesting experiments. There was one recently that was literally just models, just Gundam models. That was it. Like the actual anime was about Gundam models battling, and it actually ended up being pretty damn good. But this one's is it's kind of hard to get a read for what it is. It has from the trailer that they put out, it has a lot of really ripped teens in it. Just these teens are ripped. They've been apparently working out a lot. They got a lot of muscles. You can see all their muscles. A lot of ripped teens. I don't know. That's
Hey,
just all
when
I'm
you're
really getting on.
orphans and you don't have parents, what else do you have to do other than lifting weights and eating lots of protein and low
Yeah, I
carbohydrates?
mean that's kind of what's going on here. Like there, it was a very male centered sort of trailer, which is kind of interesting. I don't. The whole thing with that is that you don't necessarily know how to interpret the audience as a result. Is like, oh, are they trying to do a Gundam Wing here where it's aimed at women,
Yeah, I was just about to
or
say Gundam Wing is on the tip of my tongue whenever I think of a female oriented Gundam series.
yeah, I don't know if that's what they're going for here. Like Double Gundam Double O also had a really kind of that sort of thing as well. But there was like one single woman in the entire no two there was two women in the entire trailer, and they were just on there for like 1 second. So I don't know what's going on there. I mean, it's traditionally Gundam is traditionally a series aimed at young sort of teens, preteens type audience, and then it has this really long trailing tail of interest that kind of like, oh, it's young teens through 40-year-olds because there's a lot of fans that throw a lot of money at Gundam that have been around since the 1970s.
So it's
That's
it's kind of like Star Wars in a lot of ways, where you have this entire universe and it's a franchise unto itself. And then
sure.
you have a whole bunch of entries and spin-offs and various other ancillary stories going on within that larger universe.
Sure, and the nice thing that Gundam has is that they've kind of got away from the whole like you're destroying our childhood by just making lots of alternate universes, so nothing matters.
Yeah, my favorite is still the super nationalist racist version.
Hey, Mobile Fighter G Gundam was not racist at all. You shut your mouth. It was beautiful.
It's still my favorite though. Well, I
It is
mean,
great.
okay, when I say favorite, I mean in a different sense. As a
Dude,
spectacle,
have
it's
you
really
actually
great.
watched all of it? Like the actual story writing it is actually really good for like anime. It's kind of fucked up
It,
that
it
it's
was it
actually
was
really
hard for me to
good.
follow just because it was on the afternoon Toonami at the
Sure.
time, so I couldn't watch the whole thing in sequence every single day. But I mean, I remember enjoying a lot of it
We
when it
we
was
need to
on, and
watch that for like one of the sometimes because the funny thing is that it's basically like a wuxia film because that's what that director really likes. Is that it's
Wuxia.
basically like a Chinese martial arts film.
Ah, gotcha. Okay.
There's he takes a lot of inspiration from that sort of thing, and there's kind of that a lot of plot elements that are kind of sort of inspired by that, and it's interesting. But I won't dwell on this too much. Anyways, basically with this new Gundam anime, it's being directed by Yatsuyuki Nagai, who previously directed Toradora, which is pretty good, and the various railgun stuff. I'm not particularly sold by this director selection. It's not really inspiring for me. And the screenplay is by Mari Okada, who previously did the screenplay slash scenario planning, quote unquote, for Wixos, which I believe you liked a lot.
To some degree, yeah. I mean, it was probably the most fucked up card game anime I've ever seen. Like, I think
What about
it's one
Kaiji?
kaiji. Well, I'm thinking about card game anime as in not the kind of trading card game style card game
Yeah.
anime. Like, otherwise I'd have to put in like Chihaya Furu in the same category, and it's not in that genre at all. And kaiji is more of like a I don't even want to call it slice of life. It's just it's a slice of life of like a scumbag kind of existence.
Yeah, but also okay, yeah. Yeah, Kaiji's
Yeah,
good. Other thing she wrote was The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, which was interesting.
that was a
Uh,
weird one.
she did, I believe, the Darker Than Black sequels. The original Darker Than Black was really good. The sequels were really bad. She did the mediocre Aquarian sequel. It's a super robot anime that keeps getting sequel series for some reason. And she's done basically like tons and tons of series. She's one of the most prolific script writers in like anime.
Hmm.
She's also done a lot of really, really terrible shit. She's the one who did all the writing for all those that pedophile anime. That's literally just a pedophile anime. She did all the writing
Oh,
for that.
oh God, what was that one
So
called?
a Kodomo no Jikan.
Okay, yeah, that was okay. A long time ago,
That's the one I think of.
I would write these fake letters to various congressmen I didn't like, and one time I wrote one to Senator Jeff Sessions asking him to make an anime appreciation day, and in this fake letter from a fake constituent, I suggested him to watch Kodomo no Jikan.
That's fucked up. But hey, I would not wish that upon anybody because that's a crime that could get you probably in jail. Actually, that's the
Well,
kind of
why do
anime
you
that if
think
you
I
watch,
picked
you may get
Senator Jeff
arrested.
Sessions to write that too? There's a reason.
Sure.
I
So
don't
yeah,
know
that's all.
why. I just did that for fun. I just didn't like them. So I wrote
Yeah.
them these weird emails from fake people that I made up.
But yeah, this Gundam like basically looks kind of an emphasis on grunts and ground combat, which is kind of interesting because that's kind of what I like out of that sort of
The
mecha that's
realities of
realistic
war.
series. We'll see if it's any good. I mean, like I
Yeah.
said, there's been a lot of bad stuff, so we'll see. That's all I have for news. There's some minor other topics before we get into the main topic. One thing that we were talking about beforehand that I thought would be interesting, kind of discuss proper within the show, is that one of the previews that I saw, right, it's kind of hard to even call it a preview, before uh, the actual film proper was this preview for Zootopia.
I would call that, instead of a preview, it's just a teaser. You
It
know,
was like a pitch.
yeah, like these are the things that they put online, like it's like the 10-second thing going like, here's a new Iron Man movie coming out. Like, just go like, okay, you know what this is. You're just kind of like, oh, get excited. We'll eventually have a real trailer that says what the movie is about later. I don't
But it
know
was
why
like
they
2 minutes
chose.
long.
Yeah, it's 2 minutes long, and I don't know why they decided to show this in a theater. Like, this is the kind of thing you just show online. Like, because I guess for me, like when I'm at the movies, when I see trailers, I want to be able to see the movie within like a few months or something. Like, I don't know why they're putting this in theaters, especially because like it already made a huge impact when it was online. Like,
Either
everyone had heard about it when they put it online, and everyone was equally baffled about the fact that this teaser felt the need to explain the concept of anthropomorphism, which has been around ever since the beginning of goddamn literature. I mean, we have
yeah.
like Reynard the Fox being like one of the first, like, very early forms of literature that's still documented. And it's like, yeah, anthropomorphism is a thing. We've seen it be fur, as the trailer likes to say. It's
Uh,
like, I mean, and Disney's done that. Robin Hood, a Jungle Book, a Great Mouse to I mean, like, just the I liked the concept art way back when they were first talking about this thing being done. I think the art style is really cute and all that, but this teaser being released in the context of other trailers is just frustrating, because the rubric in which I'm judging it is story and premise and things like that. The premise is just a stylistic thing. Like, that's not enough as to work as just a premise to show off as if it's a trailer.
yeah, it was really strange. I don't like. Mm, I mean, there were some good jokes in it. It was kind of funny,
Yeah,
but it
I
was
mean,
just
the art
odd.
style's cute, the animation's fun. I mean, but again, like, we don't know what the movie's about.
Yeah, I mean, is it? Is there really that much of a need that they had to explain anthropomorphism like it to the modern audiences? Like they wouldn't understand. Like, oh, these animals are like people. They're like people, but animals. It's like you combined animals and people.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, my guess is they either, okay, so there's either two things. One, they're underestimating the average intelligence of the audience to a astounding degree that has never been seen before. Or two, which is what I think is, we don't really have enough footage or enough to cut together into an actual trailer, so we need some kind of teaser of some sort, and this is as much as we could come up with, considering the title being just Zootopia.
When's that film supposed to be out?
Not until like next year.
I was gonna say, like, if they didn't have anything ready at this point, that's dire.
Well, no, it's like, I mean, I guess, but it's just that,
Oh yeah, it isn't out for like almost like 10 months, huh?
yeah, like, that's the thing. It's like almost a year. So why are they doing? I mean, the other thing is, like, it's non animation, but the other trailer that just makes me just angry every single time I see it is Pan. That thing where it's like, oh, it's Peter Pan. Like, they've been showing that trailer for months and months and months, and it still looks like insipid and terrible. But like, are trailers just like a year out now? Like, when they put them in movies, because it used to be like, coming in a few months or at least maybe half a year away. But now these things are being shown like almost like a year or two in advance. It's kind of baffling.
Yep.
And oh, the last thing you have is an article.
Yeah, so there's an interesting article on Polygon by Carly Velosi. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong because I'm terrible at pronouncing words,
I think
as
it's
I'm sure you're well
Voloki
aware.
because it's two C's and an I.
Yeah, probably. Like I said, I'm bad at pronouncing things. I'm sure everybody's realized this as they've been screaming at their audio players over the last dozens or so episodes. Like, you said it wrong. It's not epitome. It's epitome, you motherfucker. Uh, so there's this article about Steven Universe and specifically how Steven Universe can actually and have some commentary on consent, sex, and healthy relationships. It's an interesting read. I'm not going to go into too much detail, and it's a bit spoilery to not necessarily the most recent Steven Bomb, but like a one previous to that. So maybe I don't know, like June-ish time frame, I guess would
Yeah,
be.
near the end of season one.
Yeah. I mean, season two stuff talking about the cluster.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's some little post like into early season two stuff. But it's basically an interesting read. I just want to point out because some interesting looks at how Steven Universe uses its own internal mythology and its own internal rules as a way to discuss, relationships and stuff that is a bit heavy for necessarily for children, and interestingly handles it much better than, say, modern shows for adults necessarily handle it.
Yeah.
The big
That,
metaphor that
that
they refer to is, Game of Thrones using rape as a plot element so often. And this kind of comments on how a show's able to use it a lot more tactfully, a lot more interestingly, and a lot more positively
yeah,
for
and
kids.
I think also just because Steven Universe handles that topic beyond just sex, because the thing about Steven Universe handles the idea of consent and health is that the idea of fusion is not just romantic, it's also friendships, and I mean, yeah, there is possibly a romantic and sexual thing to some of them as well. Not every fusion is the same in terms of its emotional intent and content. So that's what makes that such an interesting thing, and it makes it really great for kids because kids can read the friendship and more relatable elements to their lives into the fusions, whereas adults who come into it can see certain levels of complexities that the children don't, but it still is equally satisfying to both audiences. And by doing it so subtly, it's kind of like it's a nice thing for kids to see this kind of conversation happening, but without having to bring the kids into the adult world for a second, lecture them, and then throw them back into their childhood world. It's being done in such a way that it, it's healthy. I think it's a good way of engaging them both at their level and also giving adults something to talk about. And I think contrasting it with a show like Game of Thrones and other TV shows, I mean, there's been a big thing in especially in comic books. I mean, the way it has treated sexuality and rape and things like that as just really terrible storylines or cheap characterization or just cheap conflict in a lot
The
of
old
ways.
woman in the refrigerator plot or element as the terminology went.
Yes, and one of the things I want to think about it is that Steven Universe is putting so much of our media to shame in that regard. This show that's fairly relatively light. It's meant to be for a younger audience overall. Is putting all these shows that are supposed to be it's a big I'm a big boy and I need a big show. Like it's putting those to shame. Like it's kind of showing how much in terms of shortcomings they have in terms of characterization and how they portray things. I mean, and again, the article does a good job of saying like, well, we're not talking about not showing things like assault and rape and this stuff, but it's the context and how it's being portrayed. Because
Hmm.
like in real life, yes, these terrible things happen all the time, and it can be a source of drama. But the choice of when we use it and why we're using it in our narratives is the problematic aspect, not just the flat portrayal of it.
Yeah. And so it's a good read. I think we'll have it in the show notes, but you can also probably just Google search, Polygon Steven Universe. It should be pretty much the only result I would expect. Give it a read. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Though I would say your point about it is kind of interesting in light of some of the overreactions that seem to be happening online to recent events in Steven Universe. I don't think we're going to
Yes.
touch on it here because I think that's something we're probably better off saving for a Steven Universe Season 2 episode when we eventually get around to doing that. But
And also
there's
maybe an episode about fandoms and things like that in general too.
sure because there's some interesting Steven Universe does some complex things, but there's also a lot of overreading into it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of looking in and overreading stuff and trying to derive meaning and think about stuff that happens. I like to go deep, but there's such a thing as going way too deep and reading too much and also ascribing certain types of morality that don't necessarily apply.
Yeah.
If you know
Well,
what I'm saying.
overall, just to sum it up, just people overthinking it.
Sure.
Yeah. So other than that, let's well, I guess before I want to go into Inside Out, I have to talk about this. That fucking short
Yep.
film, Lava. It was written and directed by James Ford Murphy, and he was just an animation director and supervising animator on Pixar films. So he had never really done story or directing before this. And one of my teachers back at SVA just talked about it, that sometimes these films are kind of like a reward for people who have just been in the company for long enough. It's like, hey,
Mm,
you've been working for us and we like your work. Let's give you a film to work on, put your stamp on it, and see what goes from there. In this case, I think the result was really disastrous, and I'm kind of glad that I'm not the only one who felt that way,
I
because
don't know if
sometimes
it's
people.
disastrous is really the term. I mean,
I thought
it's fitting given the themes, but I don't know.
I thought it was hard. It was hard to watch because, like, okay, it does the kind of music video 101 do not do problem of, here are the lyrics. Now the video is just going to be portraying exactly what we are just being sung.
Sure.
Like word for word. It's just literally what that is. Like it's
Yep.
it's it's a very boring betrayal.
Yep.
Portrayal. And it doesn't help that the song itself is droning and boring and doesn't change at all. A friend of mine
Sure.
who does a lot of music and ukulele stuff, he hated the song because it is, again, ukulele 101 with no real progressions or anything like that. So it's a dull as shit song. And I also refuse to let them get away with doing someone to lava or I'm in lava with you. I refuse to give that any more of a response other than just bored contempt. It's just,
Yeah.
and the premise I find just annoying in the sense that, like, I can't expect everyone else to have the same annoyance at this as I do, because I can't expect everybody to have watched a lot of student film showcases. But this kind of premise is really, really played out. I mean, I've seen it a million times. It's inanimate objects in love, and because they don't have agency over their own movement, it's supposed to add a degree of pathos to it. And I'm just sick of seeing it. And the other thing too is, like, okay, we're gonna give these rocks feelings, and we're gonna give them genders, and god damn it, we're gonna give them very explicitly different genders, and it's gonna be the male
The
rock
woman
gets to
has to
look
be
like,
hot.
yeah, the male rock gets to look like a Kevin James pile of Katamari of dog shit, and the girl has to look like this Pacific Island beauty goddess of some, in comparison. It's like, they're volcanoes. Why not just have them both look like volcanoes? And you could also do, like, hey, if you're not comfortable doing a, non beauty standard female character, then just make it a platonic friendship between two other volcanoes. You don't even have to give them gender. They're just two living volcanoes and they need some, companionship or whatever. But it's like, no, okay, we're gonna give them gender. No craggy chicks, okay?
So,
Like,
see, I hear where you're coming with this, and I agree that a lot of stuff is frustrating. The thing that really just drove me nuts about this is okay, it's clearly that they're like, okay, we're reading about volcanism and like island volcanism, where like the hot spot for the volcano moves and volcanoes grow and then die over time. And they're like, oh yeah, and then a new volcano appears underwater. That's interesting. Oh, it kind of has like a little tragic thing because he's singing the song about wanting to be in love, and then the volcano that's being born and kind of hears it, and then by the time she's born, he's dead. Wouldn't that be kind of a tragic message about like love? It's like, no, we loved so hard that he came back. Fuck
Yeah,
it,
that was the
science.
thing. Geologically, I was confused by this.
That just
And
pissed me off. That was what pissed me off about this. Like, okay, you have a theme that you're going with here. You have a very clear inspiration. You don't just go, nah, fuck it. We decided the kids would be bothered by it. Fuck that. That's what pissed me off. Like, if the thing had ended with a kind of a tragic thing, I'd be like, oh, that's kind of interesting that they actually went
or a
there.
theme of she carries on the baton.
Yeah, exactly.
She carries the message of love with her to whatever follows next.
Even
like,
though
that
she
could
didn't
be
necessarily meet
a
him.
bittersweet, beautiful thing.
Right.
Or maybe they did meet, but very so quickly that one moment is enough for both of them.
Yep.
That they at least got that. So that way she's willing to go, okay, I'm going to pass this on to the next person. Because yes, it's going to be a long and lonely journey. It's going to be a struggle. But that one moment of love is powerful enough to make this worth it.
And
like,
then
that could be a
eventually you'll
really
pass it
powerful
on
message.
too. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Like, it could be powerful. Well, the other thing too is, why did the other one sink into the ocean? Like, it's not just pure erosion, is it?
I mean,
Like,
I think
is this
that's kind of
global
what they're
warming
going.
and like the sea
No,
levels
no, no.
rose?
I mean, volcanoes do eventually erode over time. Like, look at look at Hawaii. The main island, the big island, is where the active volcanoes are, and then all the trailing ones on the chain
Right,
are
that's
all slowly
yeah.
eroding due to elements and the wind and water. Over millions of years. But they even imply like, oh, over millions of years, the main volcano, the man volcano, eroded over time as well. But then like, oh no, he's
But then
loved, so
she erupts out of the thing fully out of the water, fully formed in like an instant. Like that water splash is just.
Yeah, I mean that's not horrendously wrong to some degree.
Well, I mean,
But
there's some violent action, but she came out pretty much fully formed immediately.
it was funny thinking about like erupting and then just nearby islanders being destroyed by local tsunamis and horrible death. Like, oh, love, oh God, oh, we're all dying.
Also, what if one of them was just a huge dick? Like, what if
Yeah.
they don't like each other? Like, I have a dream that someone will be forced to be born into a situation where, due to no other options, literally no other options, they'll be forced to settle for me.
Yeah, and it's also kind of got a little element of like the Tale of Genji type stuff. Like, oh, actually, she grew up listening to him talking about wanting someone to love with him. Like, oh, that feels kind of weird. Actually, think about it. She
That's
was
called
born
grooming.
hearing this stuff. Yeah,
that's a creepy
yeah.
thing.
He unintentionally groomed this other volcano into being his perfect volcano wife. That's kind of fucked, actually.
But so how long was this film? Because it felt like 20 minutes. I mean, that's the
It was
thing.
long.
Is that
It was too
again,
long.
that's why I call this thing a failure, is that it wasn't fun to watch either. It's like, something can be harmlessly cliche and have a couple like, no, this wasn't even fun to watch.
I mean,
That
it was
is the
visually
problem with it.
kind of interesting. Like there were some those seagulls looked neat, or no, those terns. Those terns looked neat.
Well, like, on a technical level, yes, the animation and art was good because the guy was an animation director. Like, he knows the animation. It's the story that is fucking horrible, and the song is just the fucking song. I
have a dream.
Sought in lava with you. It's like, fuck, god damn it. I feel like Lewis Black watching this fucking movie.
Yeah, that was not certainly
It was-
not
it
very
was
good
not- it
compared
was
to
not
past
a-
Pixar shorts, because Pixar's
Yeah.
had some pretty good shorts.
Yeah, it definitely was, I think, one of the worst ones they've done. So, I mean, and it was unfortunately a kind of a bad start to a film that I ended up liking quite a lot.
Yep.
I mean, as with anything, it has flaws, or as some might call it, not without flaws. But it's yeah. I mean, I'm not sure how I want to go at it first. Let me just go through just a couple details. So, of course, this movie came out 2015. The director is Pete Docter. And he is kind of a very big Pixar success story because so the movies he's directed were Up, Monsters Inc., and and this one, and they've all been very big critical successes for Pixar. I mean, and both financially as well. And then he also did the story for Wall-E, Toy Story, and Toy Story 2. So he's had quite a bit of success in the past. So Inside Out is kind of like a, for me at least, was like a nice return to form for Pixar, doing, I think, pretty good films with kind of a making itself different than, I think, than a lot of other films out there. Because for a while I felt Pixar had been kind of resting on its laurels, or kind
Mhm.
of coasting on the goodwill the public had for it, and they were mostly just producing sequels and just various projects I wasn't interested in. There was also the fiasco behind Brave's production.
Mhm.
um, this one apparently had some interesting production things too. We got a great email, so I feel like reading this one out. Mr. Benjamin Peoples sent us a great email. On the Frozen episode, you guys touched upon the many script revisions the film went through during development and production. Probably the most famous is the writing of Let It Go determined that Elsa couldn't be the film's villain. You guys seem to feel that Frozen showed the scars of its long development and production, and having had so many hands in its creation. This leads to Inside Out, which is kind of remarkable in that it too had a long gestation, but came out, at least to me, as a tightly paced, extremely focused film that has a great sense of structure and purpose to it. It went through 6 years of production, and in reading interviews with the film's director, Pete Docter, there were enough script revisions that they ended up with something like 7 distinctly different screenplays. The move to San Francisco being the catalyst for the events in the film came a few years into development, apparently, and the 5 lead emotions were narrowed down from a possible 27. Again, you'd never know that watching the film because of how well put together it is and how almost everything fits together. But that lava short, holy shit, is that bad? So that was, I mean, I had not read enough interviews, so it was kind of cool to know that the development was a really long period of time. And the only other interview I had read was that he himself had, as a child, gone through a big move. I think his parents moved him to Denmark as a kid, so there was kind of a similar emotional response in his own life to kind of give a basis to this. But the 27 emotions, boy, I'm really glad they narrowed it down.
Yeah.
I think the 5 they picked were, a pretty good representation. I'm kind of curious about disgust being one of them, but that didn't really bother me, so it worked
Yeah,
out.
that was the odd one out. That felt kind of like they put that there for gags.
Kind of. I could understand like a little bit. I mean, I don't know if disgust is the right word for it, because there is that emotion that's kind of necessary that they're missing, but I kind of get it.
Kind of a critical sort of,
Yeah,
thought sort of type
yeah,
thing.
it's kind of like it's somewhere between, it's kind of like an offshoot of anger and fear,
Mm.
somewhere in between those two, which made sense that they made those a trio, as the way
Yep.
they broke this thing up. Let's go into the visuals, I think, which is before we get into the main themes. I think it's actually kind of interesting how, I think, subdued a lot of it was. Like, in terms of color, it was kind of intelligent about it, where the inner universe is very colorful, but the outside world is very realistic. And I think, that version of San Francisco is probably one of the most depressing and gritty versions of San Francisco I've seen in a long time. I mean, the street she moves to is just this dingy, it's in the shadows, it's covered in grime. She goes to the bus terminal that's also that. I mean, like, the school is kind of colorful, but it's still a little bit drab. Just overall, like, the real world environment that she finds herself in kind of matches her emotional level in terms of, like, the use of color and the design.
It's kind of interesting because isn't Pixar kind of out of that area? Actually, I don't know if
It
that's
is. It's in that area relatively. So
yeah.
it's in that Valley area around, like, around the Redwood City area in San Francisco. It's like, I think it's not on the main city. Like, but it's in, like, I think it's a little bit southeast of it, if I recall correctly. But yeah, I mean, I think they were able to do their homework and things like that.
Right.
Um, the other thing I really liked is, I think they finally understood how to do human skin really well, and they also did the hair really well. And one of the really small details in the hair that I thought was really cool is that no one had this perfect hair. They had those tiny little, frizzy stragglers that, realistic hair has. And that kind of was kind of a nice little thing. So, like, even people who had combed hair, you'd see the kind of little bit of light catching the little halo in, it's a realistic effect that I kind of liked a
Hmm.
lot.
The visual effect I think I liked the most was the in the inside thing with all the various core emotion people. I don't know if that's a proper term for them. I guess it is. Yeah, kind of the five main emotions. It'd be very easy to kind of just make them just kind of solid blobs, so to speak, in the sense that their edges could be kind of a hard cut, but instead they have this sort of diffuse effect of like particles that's really kind of interesting. That you don't necessarily see it in like every scene just because you're typically not zoomed in enough, but like particularly with Joy,
Yeah, you definitely
when you
see
get
it.
the zoom in shots, you see if you look at actually the kind of the borders of her body, there's actually this kind of glow off of like particles. It's like where it's like, oh, this isn't like a solid entity. This is it's some sort of amalgamation. It's not real. It's something in the mind. It fits the themes that they're kind of going for. It fits the setting. Fits the cosmology. It's just kind of also an interesting sort of visual effect to kind of call out like, yeah, this is something unique, and it's an interesting style.
Yeah, like the one thing though is the problem is because that detail is so subtle that most of the time they look like fuzzy Muppets.
Sure.
Like but but as you said, when you see that, you see these kind of little droplets kind of exiting them. Like you go, oh, you then realize, okay, now I see that they are kind of an abstract idea given some kind of shape, as loose as it is. So I like the character designs as well. I think the way they design the five main emotions, I really like their designs in general.
Mhm.
I like the way they, especially with the way they animated them. Like one of my favorites in terms of just the way they visually animated him was Fear. The way his mouth interacts is kind of not a real traditional CG thing. Like he kind of breaks into almost like a 2D effect with some of his mouth movements and his head movements and things like that. It was really kind of interesting.
Yeah, I noticed
Um,
that. He kind of has like sort of he's almost like in a classic sort of old style cartoon feel, like kind of like a Looney Tunes feel to like
he
both
has
his
like the
character
Mickey Mouse
animation.
ears thing. Like how
Sure.
no matter how Mickey turns his head, his ears kind of stay the same shape. It's kind of like that, where if he changes direction from left or right, his eyes still kind of remain a constant.
Well, also just I think in terms of how he was animated in general, he has a very 2D sort of all of
Sensibility.
yeah, just like kind of in terms of like the kind of it's very easy to kind of just shove the models, so to speak. It's not that simple into the kind of world and just kind of animate them out. But like the way that he's deliberately moving feels very 2D. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean they in terms of the way they handled silhouettes, the way they had all the features, kind of compositionally in his poses were very
Hmm.
much to be read 2D. Like if you shined a flashlight on him, you would totally, and you saw just the shadow of it, you could definitely read his emotions very clearly and his actions.
Yeah.
That's why I would say, like, yeah, 2D sensibility to the way they animated him. I thought casting overall was really, really good. I mean, they got, I think, the perfect people for who they were. Amy Poehler as this version of Joy was, I think, perfect.
Hmm.
Especially coming off of the character she had been playing for the last few years on Parks and Recreation, Leslie Knope. It was very fitting, and I think she sold it really well. I also I just like Amy Poehler. She just does, she's very funny. I like her acting is very good. I think Lewis Black as Anger was a really good casting choice. He did that really well. He didn't overpower it either, but he was, they used him well. Mindy Kaling, I'm not too familiar with her, other than I think she has that show Mindy Project. She did a pretty good job as Disgust. Disgust as a character, I think, just didn't really have as much impact. But again, the story's not really about her or those other three as much as Joy and Sadness. Bill Hader as Fear was really good.
Yep.
He has that voice that you kind of recognize. You're like, I heard it somewhere. I just can't remember.
Mhm.
And then Sadness, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with this one. Phyllis Smith. Have you heard of her before? I haven't really. But she played Sadness pretty well. It was kind of a more generic kind of voice for Sadness though.
Mhm.
Like there wasn't too much specific to her performance. But again, I think the movie was really mostly about kind of Joy's journey more than Sadness. Like Sadness was kind of operating the way she should have been, and the entire movie was really about Joy coming over her own kind of burdens and way of thinking to accept sadness. So I think Joy having a little bit more characterization than the other ones and being a little bit more specific in the performance made sense to me.
I mean,
Um,
yeah, and a lot of it was simply about, coming to terms with the fact that there's other emotions that matter than just being happy at all times.
Yeah, and also even not just in terms of emotions, but someone trying to do make everything the same way every single time and kind of manically holding on to past victories and maintaining the past forever.
Sure.
Is another big aspect to it. And then the other standout voice I think is Richard Kind as Bing Bong, the imaginary friend.
Yeah.
And I think they handled him really well. Like I was kind of expecting them to go certain avenues with him that they didn't, and I'm really thankful that they didn't. I guess we could go over like the basic plot. I don't feel like going into nitty gritty because a lot of it is kind of like going from one set piece to the other as a overall journey. But I
Yeah,
think the emotional beats I think are the important part of this. I
I
mean,
mean, that's actually one interesting thing about this. That actually, a lot of the middle is actually kind of just action filler to some degree. Like it matters and kind of the overall, like it gets from one place to another, and there's a lot of interesting visual stuff. But it gets kind of, I wouldn't say road trippy, but kind of road trippy in the middle,
it
where
gets
a
a bit
lot,
repetitive in certain parts.
sure,
Like
and I mean
it's
a lot
just
of
like
it,
Joy just still doesn't get it. And I think they did that also as a way of structurally because you need to then see the effects in the real world because you need that space to kind of jump between the two parts of the inside the head and then outside and how that's
sure.
affecting and how they're both kind of this horrible feedback loop, this kind of tornado um you know of just being in a bad situation essentially,
Mhm.
and it's interesting. I think they handled it pretty well. So the basic premise is that in our heads, or so, maybe not physically. I mean, I don't know whether or not any of this is quote unquote physical, but maybe just an abstract representation of something. But we have kind of the emotions that guide us, and there's this kind of control panel, and they can kind of tinge our memories with the various emotions, and those emotions make up the core of our personality and who we are and how we come to the decisions that we do, etc. And so the various emotions kind of decide between them when they're necessary to be expressed or used to kind of get the person through their daily life.
I mean,
And
there is kind of like a sort of historical. This was an idea that certain people in history have had. Thomas Edison, most famously, believed that there was like 15 people living inside his head, maintaining and monitoring all his memories as kind of a like all factory workers, kind of handling every sort of thing. This has been a sort of a classic sort of thing of like kind of explaining what's going on in the human head. Obviously, not very real, but it's fun to
well,
think
no,
about.
it's. I mean, ask a bunch of psychologists, and I think people will get a little bit confused by this. I think a lot of the old theories that you're talking about were people trying to come up with explanations for the existence of the subconscious before that was as a concept, kind of existed as a concept that you could kind of explain the thought processes that come naturally out of you without coming out of the explicit frontal lobe kind of thing. So people, came up with, oh, there's this external force with this other force within me, and they kind of personified them.
Hmm.
And but I thought this was a creative way of doing it. The I loved the fact that they didn't explain everything. Like they'll give you little hints of like, okay, the train of thought, ideas, here's the control panel, but they don't explain, like there's no really explicit hierarchy. There's no kind of, it would have been easy to turn this thing into kind of like a satire on corporate culture and like the roteness of this type of labor and things like that. I think they intelligently stayed away from doing that kind of thing here,
Yeah,
and also over explaining it.
the internal cosmology was pretty interesting, I found. I don't know how well it holds up to, thinking about it too much because there's a lot of ways that kind of like, if I try applying this certain logic, this doesn't make much sense. Like, I don't,
But it
don't,
worked within itself.
sure, it works within itself, and it was also really interesting in terms of how it played out. Some of my favorite moments were actually the depictions of the different emotions, at the panel driving things, but interacting with other people and other, or the other emotions in other people's brains and trying to like to signal them. I thought that was kind of my favorite parts. They went and touched on that at the end as well, for kind of an
They did
extra
it
sort
better
of
at the
thing.
end. I have to admit, when I first saw the first teaser for this movie, I was kind of upset by it because they only showed the part where it was inside the parents' heads for the most part. And that scene with them at the table was so men are from Mars, women are from Venus type of thing.
Yeah,
Men like sports. She's emotionally attuned. She uses passive aggression. I mean, that was, without any other context, that was just really bad. But when you actually got it within the context, it was not nearly as bothersome. Like it worked a lot better in the overall structure. And I think that look inside the parents' heads was an interesting contrast because with the way I think they intelligently also decided, let's kind of show how the emotions came to be through the life of this girl. So very first is joy, and the control panel was just one button,
oh,
and it was just between joy and sadness, like one button: laugh, cry. And then over time, as the more emotions show up, the control panels become more complex and interesting. But the one theme is that joy is this kind of self-appointed leader. She has defined the kind of the goal of everything to be like, okay, we need to make everything in her life just happy all the time, like every single thing. Like, because she grades her successes looking at the wall and seeing that most of them are hers. You know,
and
and
the
it's
interesting thing in looking in like to like the parents' minds, I found was the fact that it wasn't necessarily joy driving them, or and in
yes,
fact, all the other emotions were really working in concert as a team. But like in the
yes,
mother's mind,
exactly.
it was sadness that was technically in the quote unquote leadership position, kind of like I don't know, like
But
kind
it
of like
but it
super
was
robot setup, and then the anger in the father's head.
Yeah, but at the same time, yeah, I mean, and that was kind of a nice detail, like this, the sadness and the anger being in a kind of leadership position, but that leadership position was still more um, collaborative
Yep.
in both of their heads. Like the mother's much more so than the father's in that case, but. I thought it was a really nice way of contrasting that, and then I think that also built up the theme at the end. Where the idea is that the emotions work together in a more nuanced way of expression. As this girl gets older, not all emotions are as simple and easy. Like
Mhm.
as you get older, you get happy moments tinged with sadness, and you also get anger, but also a certain level of fear at the same. Not everything is black and white in that regard, and by showing the parents being matured adults at this point, and the way those emotions interact, and you kind of see that Riley, the girl that these characters are in, she starts on that journey near the end of the film, because again, not everything is suddenly resolved. It's kind of
Nope.
like, that's what I liked about it too. It's like, everything's solved, perfect. It's like, no, it's going to be a continuing journey. Like the emotions are starting to realize how they're supposed to work together, and a lot of it was honestly joy, like the joy's desire to keep everything the way it was. And it's interesting. I thought it's actually kind of like, it's one of the most emotionally mature messages I've seen out of, I think, most kids films. And I think that was what I really liked about it. And I think that's what makes it kind of an important film for a lot of kids to see, is that it's okay to feel emotions, and sometimes it's necessary to feel emotions other than happiness. Like I think there's a folly in that people have to hope that every moment in their lives is perfect at every given time, and that anytime that happens, that's somehow a failure, as opposed to, it just, that's just the way things worked out, and this is how you deal with it and then move on and learn from it. So I kind of liked that overall thematic message throughout the entire film.
Right.
And that look inside the parents was kind of a really subtle way of doing it. Overall, this film did some really great things of putting in little devices without making them very obvious that they were going to come back later.
Sure.
Like they'll mention like the light bulb for ideas, and it's not too much of a Chekhov's gun. Or one of my favorites that took me by surprise that they were going to bring back was with Bing Bong. He had the that wagon, the rocket ship thing.
Hmm.
It was nice because they integrated that so well into who he was, and kind of showing who Riley was before, and it was so kind of integrated into just, okay, this is like a flashback portrayal. I was kind of not expecting them to actually bring it up as a device to be used as a solution later. Like, it wasn't so obviously here as like, this is going to be important for later, here's a hint, arrow, arrow, arrow.
I
Like a
mean, part of
lot
the
of
reason
movies do that.
I mean, part of the way they were able to obfuscate that is that its purpose was sort of obfuscated in the sense that they were kind of hiding the fact that, like, oh, if you fall in the pit, they kind of showed it as like a black abyss that seems literally endless,
Yeah.
but that turns out to not be the case. And by hiding that information, they actually allowed them to kind of subtly hide sort of like the second you see a pit and see it's not entirely endless, you can see the bottom, that automatically establishes that kind of like, oh, they're going to end down there and they're going to have to try to get out. That it automatically establishes that. If you just have it as what looks like an endless pit of like instant, death, that kind of establishes like, oh, it rather it doesn't hides information and withholds it, and then the fact that we get more information about it later, allows different things to be used in context of it. So it's an interesting way of kind of hiding the sort of their future plot by deliberately kind of covering over that.
And at the same time, it doesn't feel unfair either.
Sure.
Like when you read a mystery novel and the solution is like, okay, there was no way that anyone could have come up with that.
No,
Like
it was
the
just
pieces are
they actually
there.
hit it with their visual effects essentially.
Yeah, or it's just that just because we couldn't see the bottom doesn't mean that it was bottomless.
Yep.
So it's like, no, it's fair. I mean, it's relatively fair. It's okay. It's a slightly unfair because we're not shown the bottom until we see it, but it used our assumption that it was an endless pit
Yep.
against us in that way, and so it's like, okay, that's fair game. Good job, movie. You got us. And speaking of Bing Bong, I was really glad they did not go the route I thought they were going to originally. I was worried they were going to make him a lot like you saw Wreck-It Ralph, right?
Mm-hmm.
The character Turbo. I
Mm.
thought they were going to have Bing Bong turn out to be kind of like a Turbo figure or a kind of a much darker shadow of Joy in that regard, where they both want to maintain the past and return to the past. And I was worried they're going to turn Bing Bong into a villain of some sort, where he was going to be the one trying to, manipulate things and steal stuff or try to, for his own purposes in a much more nefarious way.
I mean, they did kind of open it up with him like stealing memories at the beginning with that,
Yeah,
so it
and
kind of implied that they
that's what
might
I
be
was
going that
worried.
direction.
Yeah, and I was worried about that, but I think they handled him really well. And they also allowed the moment with him at the end to be sad and they let it be. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't do like, the magical resurrection thing. They didn't do, they go like, no, like you have to let that go, both, in terms of, you know, narratively, like you need to let it go in terms of um,
Let it go.
moving on and things like that, but also just in general, like it fit the theme really well too. So I thought they handled him really well, and he was also just like a nice, like, he broke up the road trippy dynamic between Joy and Sadness, because them going off against each other and Joy still not getting it would have
Mm-hmm.
just been really boring.
Yep.
And I think also having Bing Bong be the one that Sadness proves her worth with to Joy was a good way of showing Joy that Sadness has a purpose.
Yep.
And it's interesting because, like, when you first look at this movie and the way it's presented, again, much from Joy's perspective, you don't see the point of what sadness is. Like, it's kind of hard to conceive, and you go like, yeah, why is sadness there? Like, wouldn't we be happier without sadness and things like that, or wouldn't we be better?
Yes, I
And
think we
that
would be strictly speaking happier without sadness.
Yeah,
But
but
go on.
would we be better off? And I think
No.
that's the idea. Is the film
Yeah.
again just goes, well, yes, we would be happier, but does that mean better off? And I think that's again the same trick they kind of played on us as with the chasm. You know, it's using our assumptions against us, and so then when we see sadness working with Bing Bong as a way of going like, okay, you need to feel sad at this point. Like you just need to come to terms with it, so then you can get help and also just move on. Like that's how that works. And so you both the joy and the audience are given that epiphany at the same time. And I thought that lent that moment a good amount of strength. I thought that was a really smart way of doing it. I mean, overall, I thought it was very tight, fairly tightly scripted. And I mean, the anger, disgust, and fear sections were not, I think, as good, just because I don't think they were as developed, or I don't know. They weren't as good, but at the same time, like I get it. Like the whole point is that those three working with each other is supposed to be disastrous, and so sometimes you get some really good comedic moments out of it.
I mean, part of the issue is that with that they outright established from the beginning. Joyce saying like, "Oh, I get what the purpose of these three are. They're important. I don't get sadness." They
Yes.
automatically set up the conflict between Joy and Sadness very early on when they're setting up the entire thing. but they also immediately set up that fear, anger, and disgust, they all have a purpose, and essentially remove all levels of conflict there because they're also all automatically accede to joy. Like they all automatically just accept joy being the captain of the ship, so to speak.
Well, and the other thing to do is that they do in the film is that the emotions are as mature as Riley is. Like they're not privy necessarily to as much of an adult way of thinking. Like they're a little bit smarter, I think, and a little bit more aware, like intelligent to some degree, you know. But overall, like they kind of repeat attitudes that a kid would have. I mean, you especially hear it in a lot of Lewis Black's performance. I thought he did a really good job of going like, his outrages, they're kind of phrased in a more adult way, but the overriding assumptions and the ideas he's coming at with them is still from a very childish angle.
Sure. And
So like
him
when he
just
goes
constantly
like
want to
things were
say that.
better back when in Minnesota, it's like, yeah, well, like that's the way a child would think, but he phrases it in through an adult voice. But he and Riley are just as mature as each other,
Yep.
and the same thing with Joy. So like it was interesting because like I didn't like the idea of having these emotions be too separate from the person, because that would have felt a little bit like removing the agency of the individual in the hands of these emotions, where in that they're kind of a fusion of it. Like they see the world through Riley's eyes, and yes, they have a slightly independent mode of thought, but at the same time they are connected on a certain level that kind of makes them also the same person.
Right.
So they're not entirely separate actualized beings, but they're treated as aspects. So I thought that was a really important distinction. And again, they didn't spell it out. Like no one sits there and goes like, "Oh, we're aspects of the personality." Like no, they let them be portrayed that way. Like the whole thing, the way it does the world building is there's like a little bit of explanation, but they kind of leave a lot of it to being shown. Like it's show not tell.
It
You know,
is a perfect example of that. Because, well, to be fair, early on they do have the whole thing of like Joy explaining, like, here's how this works, kind of thing.
yeah,
And that
and
is
well, it was
pretty
just enough. Like she didn't go through like every detail. It's like okay,
sure.
sometimes you have to explain, but again, they did enough and left everything else to go. Okay, I can kind of sense the rhythms here.
They also did it. They also interspersed it heavily with like kind of examples. The one I think comes to mind immediately is the whole thing with like Riley is really young, as like a young toddler at the dinner table with the whole broccoli situation of them all trying to understand what broccoli is as a new experience, and them deciding, oh no, we can't eat that. And then all the different reactions, getting Riley getting angry, and then oh he's doing the aeroplane. Oh, okay, everything's okay.
Yeah, that was
Back to
great.
okay, the aeroplane's here. Everybody go to joy mode. We're fine.
That was a great moment. Again, like it's so well observed, and again, like they didn't have the characters suddenly betray an intelligence higher than that. The
No,
the emotions were fooled by the airplane thing just as much as Riley herself is. So basically, what it is they're an adult voice given to childish thought processes.
right.
And I thought they did that really well because again, I think in lesser hands, a movie like this would make them just adults trying to dictate this person from afar,
Right.
and they didn't do that because like the with the plan for her to run away, it came organically through the reactions of those three with just as much dim understanding of the consequences and the reality as a person who's 12 years old would be. So I thought that was I think that was really good characterization, and again, like it was a lot stronger than I was initially expecting it to be in that regard.
Absolutely.
So in terms of plot, I guess we can go into that because we've been jumping around. But again, the plot is
Is there
fairly
really
kind of
much we can talk about plot
it's
wise? I
fairly
mean,
simple. I mean, she is this girl who has a pretty good life. She's around 11 or 12 years old, and she's been living in the Midwest, I guess, for a long time. Her dad,
Minnesota.
son, Minnesota. She suddenly moves to San Francisco because her dad gets a new opportunity. We never really find out what he does, but that's fine because
Well,
the
no,
movie's from her perspective.
they imply that it's basically him doing like a startup, so he's kind of a weirdo business yuppie. I guess what's kind of going
Kind
on
of,
there.
but again, they don't do a lot. They don't spend a lot of time on that, which is again, it's because it's from her perspective. She doesn't understand it, and so the audience doesn't. But everything in her life. So she loses her friends. She can't really do her. I mean, she basically just has. She's also burdened a lot. I think one of the big moments in this film, I think that sets up the larger conflict for me is that first night in the house where the mother goes in and tells her, I'm so glad that you're joyful, and we kind of need your smile. I think, ironically, I get why the mother was wanting to say that, but at the same time, that burden and that kind of thing is kind of something that fed Joy's existing dilemma of everything has to be happy.
Right.
Like, I have to put on this appearance. And thus, around the time when you start seeing all these other memories start getting infected with sadness, it's because the joy was becoming just a uh, it was just becoming a facade over these emotions. So sadness was operating as it was supposed to, even though all the other emotions are viewing it as a mistake. So it was kind of interesting. But I think that for me was one of the big things that set up the conflict was, putting this burden of like, we need you to be happy because, the mother was plainly unhappy with that situation as well. Like there's a little subtle moments that you go like, okay, yeah, you can see that the mother is definitely conflicted and she's trying to do her best, but having the daughter on her side emotionally was kind of helping her bear with it. But that becomes such a burden on her, on Riley, that it ends up kind of causing the big breakdown. Because that's a lot to put onto a child in general. So I think that was kind of like what, the parents' mistake in this regard. I don't know. At least that's how I viewed it. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I agree. That certainly is kind of my take as well. I mean, the dad kind of comes across as an asshole a lot, to be honest.
I didn't view him as an asshole as much as he doesn't look outside of himself very much. So
Sure.
he and also at the same time, again, reviewing this movie from a childish perspective, he's trying to support his family in a lot of ways. Like, and you can understand that he has a certain responsibility and
Sure.
that he can't give up certain things even though he would like to. So at the same time, I don't want to hold it entirely against him. I think he didn't handle it well,
Nope.
but I don't think his actions are inherently bad. I
I mean,
think,
it's true, and Riley obviously has no sort of concept of how he's making a living or any sort of stuff of actually getting things done. Like he even comments at the end like he too misses Minnesota and all the stuff they had there. But it sounds like it, basically implying that hey, he didn't necessarily come here because he particularly wanted to, but it's something that he needed to do, and that's something that the family needed to do.
yeah, exactly. And again, because the audience and and Riley share the same perspective, I think he does come across as this kind of unfair, unfeeling person because he doesn't really have, I think, the emotional intelligence to handle these types of things very well. As we see from that dinner table scene, he is not really able. I kind of wish they didn't do the sports joke as what was distracting him. It would have been kind of nice if he was preoccupied with something else, but
Yep.
not just be like, oh well, he's just a
He's a
he's just
man.
he's a
Sports.
man sports. It's like, well, no, like he could still be just as distracted and emotionally not very nuanced or able to read the room, but it kind of would have been nice or at least less stereotypical if they had him concerned with maybe something related to his work that he was just off zoning off to.
Right.
So because that would have at least made him feel less superficial, I guess.
Yeah, and his immediate reaction to that scene to, his daughter not communicating was also pretty off.
Yeah. Well, that was the whole idea of putting the foot down, and again, the whole thing was, I think we handled that really well. That was a
Yeah,
disaster. Like that was, from the two different perspectives and things like that. So again, I think they portrayed the dad a little bit more shallow than I would have liked. But
sure.
again, at the same time, I think it might have been intentional, just because again, we're viewing it from the film is kind of supposed to be a somewhat biased perspective.
Sure. And I mean, and interestingly enough, they do call back to that sort of thing at the end where they're doing the thing where they have the dad has the face paint on and they're like, this was a great idea. And then the mother's like, actually, this was the best idea he's had. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like his idiot child idea was something that they liked.
Yeah. It was nice to show them on the same wavelength in certain cases, so it wasn't like this situation was universally bad. You could understand why she felt bad because yes, there were terrible aspects of what was going on, but at the same time you could also chalk it up to her immaturity as well. So it wasn't a complete binary of like, you know, oh, it's good that she tried to escape the situation. It really was all terrible. It's like, well, no, there's terrible aspects and objectively awful things going on. Oh, the other thing I really liked is the way they handled her at school. They didn't do a lot of time on like, bullies or the popular girls or other crap like that. They
There's
kind
a
of,
little
I
bit.
think, wisely stayed away from that as being her primary thing. It still dealt with, yeah, she's new and she didn't have a good first impression and she's, shy at the moment and she's missing her friends and she's going through a lot, and that kind of isolates her further. But they didn't do just the outright like, oh, look, it's Patricia Jackson, she's the most popular girl and she's being mean to me, this is making it worse. Like that would have just been, again, not just a cliche thing but a bit much.
I mean, they did have a little bit of them, like immediately, identifying who the cool kids were, and like, oh, we should hang out with them. Like, no, that's a terrible way to get the cool kids to like you. And then all that stuff with her, eating
And then they but then
outside.
but then they left that at that.
Yeah,
They didn't do that further, which was nice. Because again,
it-
I think they had enough drama going on. Like her situation as is was enough already.
sure. And then
You know.
they touch it on it later at the end as a kind of a gag type thing where they do all the gag, here's what's in everybody's mind type stuff.
Well, here's the other thing I was kind of confused about. So all the creatures, all the emotions in the dad's head are male. All the ones in the mother's head are female. Riley's is a mixture of male and female, and then in some of the other heads there was that mixture as well. I was wondering if there is kind of a reason for that, or if it just happened to be like we can't have
Were
an
they
all
all
female
male or were they
cast.
all female or are they just all like I thought it was more that they just end up being haired. I don't know if they necessarily had gender so much as they were
Well, no,
had
because like the
assigned
voices
hair.
had different gender, like male voices in some of the other heads too, even though they're in
Uh,
female heads.
I don't
So
I don't
like,
know if that necessarily has any sort of meaning so much as them just doing like, yeah, well, wouldn't it be funny if we had so and so voice, anger here?
oh yeah,
That'd
no,
be
I mean
pretty
I was
great.
just that's one of those. That's just the one thing I was kind of like that. This is something after the film I was thinking about. It wasn't a distraction during. So this is
I
one of those
mean,
things that's like, this is me being like nitpicky, but it doesn't, none of the things I'm nitpicking about destroy the emotional core of the
no,
film,
yeah,
so it's not really a
absolutely.
flaw so much as like, huh, that's kind of confusing.
I
Huh,
mean,
oh
there's
well,
a like I said, there's a lot of stuff like that. If you put like a lot of thought, like how does psychological disorders work in terms of the conditions of how minds work in this film? Like
Oh
how
yeah,
is
no, that
depression, long term depression work? Like how does psychosis work with it? Or like if someone is a serial killer, how are their emotions arranged in their brains? How would
yeah.
their panel work? It's kind of like if you put like a lot of thought, like man, this really works mostly from a kind of like a generic sort of range of typical neurological states. It works fine for there, but if you try to apply that level of thinking to it, it kind of like I was like, I don't know how that would work. It probably wouldn't make a lot of sense, or the emotions in their head would actually seem pretty, like malignant at some point, or act malicious rather. Like, huh? But the thing is, like as you said, that's completely beside the point. It's
Yeah,
just it's like I've seen people try to say like, oh, it's a plot hole. It's like no,
it doesn't,
no,
because it's not
it's
a
not a
plot hole
plot
because it
thing.
doesn't ruin
It's
the
not. It's like
plot. It's
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter
yeah,
for the cosmology. It doesn't matter for the story they're telling. It's just a thing you can think about that doesn't matter at all. Like the
yeah.
fundamental story at the core, which I think in the end is relatively a simple one, but it's an important one. It's just the sense that hey, Riley is going through some hard shit right now. And in order for her to convey to her parents that she's going through some hard shit and she can really use some emotional comfort, she needs to be able to express and convey her sadness to her parents. Communication is pretty important. And sadness is a really important, thing for being honest about how you're feeling, if things are going wrong. And that's really kind of the big turnaround is Joy coming to terms with the fact that actually sadness can lead to joy, and lead to be having a much better, future rather than just being like a manic. Essentially, is kind of what Joy was kind of pushing for. Is kind of
Yeah.
always happy in all situations.
Well, and also again, it was that breakdown of what the mother was saying, like, we need you to be happy to get us through this. And that was the pressure that she ended up having to disobey that and say, like, no, I need to tell you I feel like shit. Like, I
Yep.
need to tell you I feel sad. I know it's hard on you guys,
But you guys
because
are grown
seeing me
up. You
sad
guys have.
makes, but I need to, I need the help.
Yep.
I'm your
Especially,
kid.
it's also especially kind of funny from the sense of like, yeah, Mom, I think this probably sure it's hard for the dad to be going through this hard work situation, but this is some heavy shit for like a 12-year-old to be going through. Like this is hard ass emotional shit, like yeah, your kid's probably gonna go through and have some trouble with this kind of thing,
Well,
and
here's the
that's
other thing too is that like, her percentage of her life, a year or a month is a lot longer for her than it was for these adult characters. So like
sure,
these friendships and the things that she's familiar with all her life, that is a bigger change than maybe adults do who have, if they went to a college for 4 years, they're away from home, but that's a percentage of their life,
yep.
that, and it becomes a smaller percentage as you get older.
With
For
Riley, it was
her,
everything.
yes, and that's the thing is I think the parents, as emotionally intelligent as the mother is portrayed to be, there's still limits to her as well.
Sure.
So like she means well, but she made a mistake in this regard, and that it took sadness to be the one that breaking that idea away is was the path forward. And again, like they also showed that like just because what made up your core personality before, you know that can change. Like people can themselves can change, and they're supposed to. You can't keep doing that forever. Like it's supposed to be a natural process. So I kind of liked that idea, that like the idea that loss is the ultimate end is supposed is kind of treated as a faulty thing. Like, yes, you might lose this one thing, but that doesn't mean that you'll never gain things in the future, or you won't repair things better later. Like the family island thing.
Yeah,
Like the island family gets repaired, but it's stronger because of it.
yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of that sort of thing also with like, the whole thing of memories. Old memories are constantly being discarded and gotten rid of simply because they have to accommodate new memories that are always coming in. That sort of thing of like old leads away to the new. Even if the old has to go away, that's what life is about. It's about, having new experiences, about change.
I
No
love
one
that
person's
that scene
constant.
with the forgetters.
Yep.
Though that was both it was really funny, but also I thought really a good way of explaining that, where like the ones that are faded and gray, they're just like, yeah, these are memories that aren't really recalled that very often, and therefore they're not important. But then sometimes they're arbitrarily we just like to fuck with you guys and send you
Oh
these
yeah, with the jingles and stuff. Yeah.
the gum jingle. Oh,
They
who
do
was
they
it?
overdo it like I think once too many with
Yeah,
the gum
it's
jingle
the
thing.
sideshow Bob with the rakes thing. They just
Yep.
they
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 did it
either needed
once
to
too
do it a
many,
couple more
but
times, or they needed to cut one. So they either needed to do it more times or one less.
yeah.
But I thought that scene was really good too. Like, and that goes into the theme you're talking about. Like again, all these small little moments fit the theme.
Yeah, it was incredibly well constructed, I felt, from a narrative sense. Like yeah, as I said, like some of like the weird like the
Cause and effect
cosmology of it was
stuff,
good,
yeah.
but some of like the journey in the middle kind of felt like okay, yeah, yeah, you're just kind of you had all these ideas of how you want to express stuff inside our mind, I guess, so we have to get through this stuff to get to things actually happening. Like there's a lot of stuff in there that's kind of just like drawing out the fact like oh, joy doesn't get sadness, type stuff. But it overall, even with that minorest of nitpicks, the overall thing felt incredibly well constructed and supremely well written. There's a lot of funny.
Thematically, yeah.
There's also a lot of really funny, subtle one-off gags, and
Oh
some of them
yes.
The funny thing is that they also come back to most of them later in really interesting ways, especially like when they
The
go to
the
like
dream.
the yeah the sub. Well, I was thinking more like the subconscious stuff, for example.
Oh yeah, where they the clown.
Oh, sorry, not the subconscious, the imagination world where
Yeah, yeah, where
they
they
go
do
through
the
the
Imagination
twice.
Land, and then also the cloud jokes were pretty dark.
Yeah,
Where they
where
they straight up murder two cloud people, and one of them makes a Chinatown reference.
yeah
That was kind of dark and out of nowhere. Like
yeah
straight
that
up murder.
the fun what I found funniest that they ended up calling back to was the dream boyfriend thing.
That was one thing where I go, okay, the gender politics of that is a little bit, but I didn't mind it because I
I
thought the repetition of him going, "I'll die for you, Fallen," that was pretty funny. Like they
I mean
handled it well enough that it didn't bother me.
I think it was fine in terms of sense of like that's a thing you could see, like in a
A
preteen's
preteen,
imagination, like
yeah,
they dream of what their ideal boyfriend who would do anything for them type thing is, and they do
yeah.
the type things like I'm in Canada.
Yes, that was a good catch.
And the whole thing of her going back and like, oh, actually, I'm going to use all of these dream boyfriends as a thing,
As a sacrificial,
as they
a
literally
sacrificial
sacrifice
altar.
themselves to allow Joy to do something for Riley. I thought that was pretty funny.
That was a smart setup too,
Yep.
like
Because you
using
didn't
that
think about, you
motivation.
think it's like a one-off gag, but then they call back to it, and I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah. Again, like all the gags. I loved the way they did the steps of abstract thought.
Hmm.
That was a really neat visual.
Oh yeah, that was super cool with like the deconstruction of like abstract thought. Oh, that was good.
The hard part though was that I love that sequence, but it does mess with the cosmology a little bit because I figured everything we're seeing is an abstraction already. Like
Sure.
because the thing is like the way I'm looking at it is in the head there isn't physically a metal train track with all this shit happening. Like this is all representational in some way. Yes, there is something going on, but it's not a physical thing exactly. So the abstract thing kind of, but again, that's just, this is again one of those nitpicks where after the film you think about it, but you go like, it doesn't really affect the thematic core, so it's not a big deal.
Hmm.
But I just visually love that sequence.
Your comment about the gender politics stuff with the dream boyfriend, I wasn't feeling too much there. The fact that they felt the need to get kind of do like a love interest thing at the end did kind of, that bothered me a
Oh
little bit.
yeah,
Like,
where he run where was it? She runs into the boy and the boy goes girl, and the head just freaks out, and
yeah, it's like it felt like kind of like, oh, you had to like,
it
oh,
was
she's a girl.
it
You have to make sure there's a boy
was
there.
yeah. To me it felt unnecessary.
Sure,
Like
absolutely.
because the entire crux of the film was not about her finding a boyfriend or meeting a boy or having difficulty relating to boys. It was mostly about her situation and her family. So
Yep.
her being in the hockey rink after and all that, that was enough. Like it like they didn't need to tack that extra little thing on. I can kind of see why, because they go, well, yeah, she's 12 and she's going to be changing, and she's already they were building the boyfriend maker in her imagination at that time. Like it wasn't, it was a new thing. So like they were so it kind of matched in, but at the same time it felt like a superfluous detail, and I think they just wanted the gag to show like how she reacts versus how the boy reacts. I guess
Yeah.
like that was the only other thing. I mean, it felt like
And
a
then eventually that did
superfluous.
lead into the ending stuff of them showing in everybody's minds, what everybody's kind of like. But in having that as kind of like a pre-credits or a pre, that sort of post thing type thing, it gave it too much weight when it really should not have been there front and center.
Yeah, it again it felt like a superfluous detail that took too much attention to itself. But again, overall though, I think all these little tidbits, the theme was so strongly built and constructed that even the lagging bits didn't keep it from happening. And it did everything in such little bits and pieces of explanation and characterization that it kind of built up really well. And again, like I thought it had some of the best, just the best gags in a while. Like I was not expecting to laugh at some of the jokes. Even the ones that were in the trailer that you'd seen, they were still funny when you saw them in the film.
Yeah.
It just worked out really well. So yeah, I'm really happy with how Inside Out turned out. Again, no matter how much we've been picking at it, the core is strong enough that all the little things that we can find wrong with it don't really weaken that. It's this. I had a similar thing with Wreck It Ralph, where yeah, you could pick apart a few things, but the core of it was strong enough that it can withstand any of that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, overall, I think it was a very well made film. Thought it was pretty good. It was probably one of the Pixar films I liked the most recently, I'd say, to some degree.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely for me. I mean, I haven't liked a lot of the recent Pixar stuff in a long time, really.
right. Especially because they've started doing a lot of sequels lately, which is kind of lame.
Yeah, yeah, and also Cars,
Yeah.
and not the good Cars like from JoJo, but the bad kind.
Yeah. How about that Finding Dory, huh?
Yeah, is that still going?
I think that's coming.
Huh. Oh, and they also have that. They had a preview for the Good Dinosaur, but I couldn't tell what the fuck that was.
It's about a dinosaur that's good. Oh,
Oh, it's
oh,
it's where what if the extinction thing never happened? Right?
oh,
Yeah.
oh God, oh God! That just reminded me of something that happened in the theater. So I was in the theater watching it, and they had the thing of like dinosaurs were killed by an asteroid, and what if it missed? And I hear some kid whisper to their parent, like, "Ma, is that real?" And I'm just like thinking, like, I didn't want to hear her response to that child because either direction, I don't know if I would have been happy sitting in the movie theater, depending on the reaction. Like, no, son, that's not real. Jesus killed the T-Rex, or whatever the response would
Oh,
have
don't
been.
don't worry, honey. A form of ice age was actually kind of inevitable for the Earth anyway. So whether or not the the asteroid impact killed them, they were going to they were going
Or
to either
or
die or evolve differently anyway.
or what I don't know if the kid's question was like the asteroid missing, like did the asteroid miss? Like, no, honey, this is a movie. This is a pitch for a movie. It's fiction. Do I have to explain fiction to you, my idiot
You
child?
son, you just saw the teaser for Zootopia. Okay, foxes are not wearing clothing and zipping up their crotches. Okay, no, mother, I've seen too much.
uh Wait, is that a Disney film?
What?
The
Zootopia?
dinosaur one?
A Good Dinosaur is Pixar.
Really?
Zootopia is Disney.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
It's a Pixar film?
Yep.
It looks generic as fuck.
Yep. Well, yeah. Well, hey, not all of them can be winners.
I mean, I
Like
remember
again,
I remember when Pixar used to
cars.
always be winners though. And to be fair with Cars made them a lot of money though. I fucking hate
That doesn't mean
Cars.
I call that a winner.
I mean,
My
to their
definition of
wallets it
winning
was.
is a bit more subjectively artistic.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I I don't know what else to say about this. I mean, I think it's definitely something worth watching. I thought it had a nice nuanced message that I think is important for not just kids. I think people in general are kind of driven in a lot of ways to not just emotionally, but I think in their lives for perfection in a certain way, and that can often lead to your own downfall. I definitely have that perfectionist streak, but I thought it was really something important, and it was a message that's a lot different, I think, than a lot of other kids' films really have.
Yeah, it has a very complex message, but it's not a particularly complex film, and I find that's kind of interesting. Like, obviously we haven't had a wide amount of topics to go kind of deep on the film because the overall plot and a lot of the stuff about it doesn't, there's not much you can kind of argue to kind of talk down about it or talk into it,
The
but
cause and effect is a fairly simple,
sure, it's
but
kind of event follows event, and not
yeah,
much to
it's the
discuss there.
themes and
But
how it builds
the
those that's
themes and the
important.
overall message and how things resolve is pretty interesting for me, especially as a show for children. That kind of like to say to kids, hey, actually, you don't have to be, happiness is kind of, I mean, there's always this push that, the ultimate goal for everything is happiness, and, to some degree, sure, that's true, but, happiness isn't necessarily the way to happiness, being manic, manic is a bad thing. It's a term for a bad sort of condition, mania for a reason.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's overall a good way of putting it. Um, yeah, I mean, really, the only misstep was lava. That soured my mood a lot. Or maybe that was the intention. Maybe my expectations were so lowered by watching lava that they wanted the Inside Out thing to be such a powerful contrast.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. I don't know. So overall, I would say this is definitely a recommended film. So what are we doing next?
next week we are going to be watching a certain anime OVA called Black Lion. You can download it on the internet if you look around. There are torrent websites that have it. I believe it might actually be on YouTube as well. It used to be licensed many years ago, and that license wasn't renewed for a reason that will be readily apparent. I recommend to people if you're going to watch this, unless you're really on the fence, don't look up anything. Just kind of watch it. And this is especially you also, Neeksy. I
Yeah,
don't
I'm
want you.
going in blind.
I don't want you. I don't want you reading up anything about this,
Oh, I
anything at
haven't
all.
yet.
Not no, not even after the fact. I don't want you doing any research because
Okay, I'll
I
leave that
want
to
to
you then.
I want to go into this episode and I want you to explain to me what Black Lion is about. I really want you to do
Oh,
that.
and didn't you also suggest watching the dubbed version?
Oh, absolutely. Do not watch it
Yes.
subbed. Watch it
Okay.
dubbed.
Yeah.
It
That
is.
felt like an important
Yep.
note.
And if anybody in the audience is on the fence about it, like like, oh, that's too vague for me to watch it. Uh, there's a video on YouTube called "You Should Really Watch Black Lion." If you're on the fence about it, watch that. It's a 40. It's the video is relatively short. It's like 2 minutes, and this OVA in question is about 40 minutes long. And it's just I thought it'd be an interesting thing for us to watch and discuss. So I look forward to you watching that, Neeksy, so we can discuss it.
Oh yeah, like you said, I'm going in entirely blind. I other than getting a hold of the video, I have not looked up anything about it.
Good, good.
So,
That's how I want us to proceed with this because I want us to walk into this discussion. I want you to tell me about Black Lion so I can hopefully clarify any questions you may have about Black Lion.
of which I'm expecting there's going to be many.
I mean, we'll see. I mean, Black Lion is surprisingly straightforward. It's a though it's an anime from the 80s that went straight to video and it's 40 minutes long. So, you know what you're getting.
Yeah. So after that, though, we have Captain Planet.
Yeah, we're going to be watching a subset of episodes. I don't think we've come to a decision on that yet.
We'll let you know before
Yeah,
that
I'm
week.
going to go to my think tank with my good friend Shirokujo because I think we're probably going to try pulling him in on that.
I would love to.
Because he's got Captain Planet opinions from watching a lot with me on and recording us making fun of them, putting on YouTube.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about that.
Ted Turner's greatest creation.
Absolutely, that and the bison. We'll be talking about that next episode about what specific episodes. Those are pretty short, and we're probably not going to be picking the breadth of Captain Planet because there's an awful lot of it.
Oh, we'll save some for other episodes.
I mean, there's like literally like 100 something episodes, so we're not.
Yeah.
I don't think even in the best day we're going to do all of them.
Oh
I
no,
think
just
I think
cream of the crop.
Me and Red have had some fun time sampling it, so I think we could probably choose a fun subset.
One of my favorites of all time is still the one about gang violence, where the line is, "Just because he is in special ed does not mean he's slow."
I think my favorite one is probably the one where they're in a computer simulation and they're simulating what happens, just with evolution and pollution. And the ultimate end of humankind is a robot angel that dies to pollution and turns to rock.
I like the episode where one of them comes up with a potion of pure pollution, but then, like, for what purpose is never really explained other than I guess they just really like pollution.
I like that there's a robot drone that they use, and it's a recurring character called Jason.
Oh, God.
I fucking love you, Jason. You're the best. You're the best robot ever. It's so great. You're just watching a random episode, like, oh God, wait, is that Jason? Is that Jason from the museum? Look, it's Jason.
At least he's better than that stupid floating Game Boy from Captain N.
Jason's best. He doesn't talk. He's a controlled drone. Some scientist is controlling him out there. It's great.
Oh man. So that by default makes him the best animated character from the early 90s.
Absolutely. He's just a robot that they control occasionally, and his name is Jason, and he's got like a robot arm. And then at one point, Captain Planet I think makes out with him, and also a turtle. It's really strange. We might be doing that episode. I don't know. Like I said, there's so many good choices. I need to think about this for a week. Next time when we discuss it, when we talk about Black Lion, I should have a list then. We should.
Okay. Well, we're excited. So you can always drop us a line at ADthepodcast@gmail.com. You can get this show on iTunes. If you like what we do, please rate and review. That helps us a lot. And also just posting links to episodes to your friends. Other than that, I don't really have anything else to plug at the moment, other than, of course, the Twitter. So you can reach me at RYMagnuson.
And I'm at SA Zorak.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we will see you next week with Black Lion.
Roar.